Subject-verb agreement is probably the most commonly tested point of grammar on the GMAT, and there are three core rules that are important for you to learn as it applies to GMAT sentence corrections. Rule number one is this, and it's very obvious and it's very straightforward, and yet it bears a little bit of exploration. And the rule simply is that subjects and verbs must always agree. We just saw that on the last example we did. But remember that the GMAT can camouflage it. It can make it difficult to pick up on what the subject is, what the verb is, to even tell whether or not they agree. And so let's remember the basic parts of a sentence. All sentences must clearly have a subject, like I, a verb, like, and an object, like cake, right? So a very basic sentence might be something like, I like cake. All right, where am I going with this? Well, here's a really important tip for you. When testing for subject-verb agreement, use the bracketing technique I just taught you to create an I like cake version of the sentence. Now, obviously, it's not going to literally be I like cake, but the point is you want to break it down to the most basic version of that sentence, just like we did in that last example, to where we have waded through all of the fluff, all of the prepositional phrases, all of the clauses that distract us from seeing what is the subject, what is the I, what is the verb, like, what is the object, cake. And once we have that I like cake version of the sentence, then it will ensure that you are clearly able to link the sentence's verb to the correct subject, and it will just make it easier for you to identify that agreement. So again, think about this. I like cake, fun little pictures. Hopefully it ingrains it in your mind, and this is a very useful strategy for you on sentence corrections. Now, once we kind of have that technique in our back pocket, we still have to learn some things about subject-verb agreement as it's tested on the GMAT. Let's take a look at this example as a basis for some of what I'm going to teach. The example reads, the phenomena of public demonstrations is another example of democracy in America. Now go ahead, try to apply the bracketing technique, try to apply what you already know about subject-verb agreement, see what you think about that. Do you detect an error in the underlined portion? Well, here we go. Two prepositional phrases, both introduced by the word of. We bracket those out in red in this case. And so we want to mentally block out the words of public demonstrations. That's great, useful information. Whoop-de-doo, public demonstrations. But you know what? For the purposes of figuring out subject-verb agreement, I don't care. It's distracting me. And then the same thing with the next prepositional phrase. And so the new version of that sentence, the I like cake version, would be the phenomena, which is the subject of the sentence, is another example. Does that make sense? And it's important to understand because some students may look at this and say, well, public demonstrations is another example. Well, there's a mistake because it should be public demonstrations are another example. Yeah. Is public demonstrations the subject? Would that pass the I like cake version? If you thought it would, what did you do with the words the phenomena? And you have to have a reason for blocking those things out if you're going to make public demonstrations the subject. And we know that public demonstration isn't the subject because it doesn't rest on its own. It doesn't stand on its own. It couldn't be an I like cake version. And it's introduced by that prepositional phrase, which we already said we want to bracket out. That, by definition, when it's introduced by a prepositional phrase, is going to be extra information. Superfluous information, that's not the subject of the sentence. So the I like cake version is the phenomenon is another example. And now, hopefully, it's easy to see. Is there a mistake or is this correct? The phenomena is another example. Yay or nay? Well, I'm going to have to teach you some things. Maybe you're thinking, well, actually, I don't even know. Well, it looks good. It looks good. Well, is phenomena plural or singular? And the word phenomena is actually plural. A little bit tricky. This would be a more difficult GMAT question. The phenomena is plural, therefore the word is would actually need to be changed to are to make that sentence correct. Sometimes when we use the bracketing technique and we get it down to the I like cake version of the sentence, we're still confused. We still don't know 100% whether or not the subject and verb agree. Same thing with pronouns sometimes, and same things with some various other things. So there's some things that you should learn. And one is just irregular subject plural conversions, something that you may not have looked at since your grade school days. And yet most nouns, to go from singular to plural, you simply add an S, right? Like the word chair becomes chairs. You just add an S to most words in the English language. Table, one table becomes multiple tables. You add an S. But what about words that end in on? Just like the word we just looked at, right? Phenomenon would actually be the singular. Phenomenon becomes plural when you change on to a. So phenomena, or criteria, phenomena is the plural. Here's another example for you. Criterion becomes criteria. Words that end in is, like thesis, you change it to plural by changing the ending to es. So thesis, the plural is theses. Another one might be crisis. Crisis, what's the plural of crisis? Crises. And then cactus, for example, a word ending in us in the singular, the plural ends in an I. So cactus becomes cacti. Focus becomes foci if we're talking about advanced math. And so just a table. If you want to press pause, learn this. It's not rocket science, but I just wanted to brush off a few of those cobwebs because it may be important for you once you create an I like cake sentence to actually say, hey, that's actually singular or that's actually plural, even if it's irregular. And then this is actually probably more important. Oftentimes the GMAT will use indefinite pronouns as subjects. So not words like I or you or Sally, but indefinite pronouns like everyone, everybody, several, more, most. These could be the subjects of the sentence. And yet, is it singular? Is it plural? Does it depend? And it can trip you up. And so again, if you want to press pause, if you want to memorize these or learn these, write them on note cards, it will serve you well. As a general rule, if you look at the column for indefinite pronouns that are always singular, what do you notice? Well, they all include words like one or body, or no one, anyone, everyone, someone, anybody, everybody, somebody, etc., etc. Notice the words either and neither. Each of them is. Notice how I did that, right? Because each is also singular. So each is always singular if it's an indefinite pronoun as the subject of the sentence. The words both, few, many, several are always plural. What about these ones that depend? What do they depend on? Well, they depend on the noun to which it refers. Let's just pick one of them, like most. Most of the students was or were in attendance. Most of the students were, right? Why? Because most is referring to students, plural. It's referring to most what? Most students, plural. Therefore, most students were, plural verb, in attendance. Contrast that with, I could have easily said, most of the class was or were. Most of the class was in attendance. Why? Because class is singular in that case. So most is the subject, but it's really going to depend on what the noun is that then dictates whether or not the verb is singular or plural. Same thing with some. Some of the students were, some of the class was, etc., etc. So go ahead and press pause if you want. Learn these, and then let's take a look at another example. Here's an example. Notice how it's actually one that includes an indefinite pronoun. Everyone on both sides, except the pitcher and me, was injured in the game. Now, I don't know how that sounds to your ear, or when you look at it, do you notice something wrong? But apply the bracketing technique, apply what we've just learned about subject-verb agreement, and think to yourself, is there a mistake? Go ahead and press pause if you need to. Well, I have bracketed out the prepositional phrase on both sides except the pitcher and me. That's all a bunch of prepositional phrase. How do I know I can block out all of it? Well, because the next word is a verb. There's no verb in the bracket at this point. Does that make sense? If I were bracketing out a verb, I would want to step back and take pause because maybe I'm missing the verb of the sentence. But really, I don't hit anything until I get to the word was, which is a verb, past tense of the verb to be. So I'm bracketing out that prepositional phrase, and then in the game is just additional information, additional prepositional stuff added on to injured. So at the end of the day, the new version is everyone was injured. Is that correct, or do we need to make a change? Well, think back to that table. Everyone, we said, is always singular. It's an indefinite pronoun. We see the kind of the word one in there. Everyone, someone, no one, but nevertheless it's singular. The verb was is also the singular conjugation, so that's correct. So actually we're good to go. A bit of a trick question. If you had seen this on the GMAT, answer would be A, meaning everything's good to go as it currently is. Everyone was injured. Now, a lot of students, when I use this example, sometimes you may have looked at this and thought, yeah, well, it should have been the pitcher and I, right? Maybe there was another mistake. Maybe there's not a subject-verb agreement issue. But maybe it should be everyone on both sides except the pitcher and I was injured, right? Because isn't it always the pitcher and I, my brother and I, my family and I, and it's always, is there a mistake there? Well, I'm actually going to hold you in suspense there because we are going to look at this when we talk about pronouns. But for now, suffice it to say, in terms of subject-verb agreement at least, no problems there. Rule number 2, subject-verb agreement, rule number 2. When you are joining a singular subject, like some of the singular subjects we just looked at, with another noun or pronoun by prepositions, such as along with, together with, as well as, in addition to, or accompanied by, don't worry about memorizing all of those. The point is, if it's just anything that's adding another noun onto the subject, it does not turn that singular subject into a plural one. What am I even talking about? So that's the rule. Let's look at an example. In this example, it says, the president, along with several of his key advisors, agree in principle to the major terms of the treaty. Underlined portion, is there a mistake? Go ahead and press pause, take a look, do what you need to do, see if you detect a mistake. All right, you back? Here's the deal. The president, along with several of his key advisors, does that mean there are multiple people who agree in principle to the major terms of the treaty? No. In other words, that is not the same thing as saying they agree in principle to the major terms of the treaty, and that yet a lot of students will think that it does. And the GMAT will test whether or not you know that. The rule, remember, says that if we're going to combine a singular subject, in this case the president, with words like along with, and in this case so it's the president along with lots of other people, several key advisors, that doesn't now make the whole subject collectively plural. In which case, so that's wrong. They agree in principle. That's not what we're talking about. So what's the deal? Well, here's the new version. Because if we then bracket out all of the prepositional phrases and all of the extra stuff, the president, the subject, stays singular. So it's just the president. We don't worry about his advisors. The new version then is the president agree to the terms, right? That's the I like cake version. Notice how I've gotten rid of a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff distracting me. Not only separating the subject from the verb, but then what is the subject? I mean, I see the verbs agree, but is the subject singular? Is it plural? How do you know? Well, now you know because of the rule I just taught you. The president stays singular, therefore the verb must agree with a singular subject. It must be singular. The verb must be agrees. The president agrees to the terms. And you would have to look for an answer choice that would make that change. Now, as with a lot of things in English, there are exceptions. We don't want to harp too much on exceptions. The GMAT's not all about trying to trip you up with all sorts of crazy exceptions. But here is one exception that may come up and you should be aware of. The exception is that when that singular subject, like the president for example, is joined to another noun or several other potential subjects, not by words like along with, together with, etc., but by the word and, that actually does make the whole subject plural. Let's take a look at this rewritten version of the same sentence. Now the sentence reads, the president and several of his key advisors. right? Small distinction. Before it said the president along with several of his key advisors. Not this time. This time it's the president and several of his key advisors agree in principle to the major terms of the treaty. Now that whole thing in orange is like the subject, right? That's actually now a plural subject. That's like saying they. The president and several of his key advisors, they agree in principle to the major terms of the treaty. Does that make sense? So now the subject is plural. The verb agree is fine now because it's a plural conjugation of that verb. It goes with the new subject. That is correct. I hope that makes sense. If you need to revisit that, learn that, just really that one exception's all there is to learn there, but make sure you know that. Which brings us then to rule number 3. Subject-verb agreement rule 3 says that when two words or phrases are joined by either or, neither nor, or not only but also, the number, singular or plural, of the word or phrase near to the verb determines the number of the verb. Well, that seems like a bunch of English textbook type of explanation stuff. Brett, what are you doing to me? Okay, let's make it easy. I mean, that's actually just about as easy as I can write it and explain it without showing you some examples. And I think it will become very clear to you what I'm talking about when we look at an example. So here's an example that reads, neither the council members nor the mayor, and then what I want you to do is decide. Based on the last rule, if you need to rewind, if you need to go back, if you need to look at it, go ahead and do that. Is it going to be the word take or is it going to be the word takes? Responsibility for the passage of the bill. So we have a neither nor construction. What does the rule tell us to do? Is it take or is it takes? Go ahead and press pause, do what you need to do, see what you get. All right, hopefully you got that the answer is takes. Why? Because in that neither nor construction, the mayor is the second thing listed. It's the word that's closest to the verb, right? Neither the council members nor the mayor. Okay, the council members, the mayor, it's the mayor. It's the mayor, which is singular, that's closest to the verb. Therefore, it's the mayor that then dictates what the verb must be. The verb must agree with the singular mayor. Does that make sense? So it's got to be the mayor takes. It's like the whole rest of the first part of that sentence doesn't exist, and it's literally the mayor takes. The mayor takes responsibility for the passage of the bill. Does that make sense? And actually, if the sentence had been flip-flopped, it would have been a different answer, but also correct. I mean, something as simple as now the sentence reading neither the mayor, this time the mayor is put first, nor the council members. Now what is it? Is it take or is it takes? Well, I just kind of gave it away, right? Now that I flip-flopped that, the council members, plural, is closest to the verb. Therefore, it's take, because it would be the council members take responsibility for the passage of the bill. Fairly simple there. So those three rules, and combined with the bracketing technique, will serve you incredibly well in identifying subject-verb agreement, or more importantly, disagreement on a large number of sentence correction questions on the GMAT. And with that, let's turn our attention to the second major point of English Grammar Tested, which is pronouns.